How many times have you been asked to do something? You agreed to it, maybe because you felt bad or obligated or too tired to fight it, and then you later regretted it, having said yes. Maybe you felt resentful or irritated or exhausted or underappreciated afterwards. On the flip side, how many times have you asked someone else to do something only to have them bail or half-ass it? Or maybe you even felt too guilty to ask them for help in the first place. Well, in this video, we're going to talk about a new perspective on how to preempt those situations. And this perspective is something I've been toying with a lot recently. It's sort of a new train of thought for me. It's not something that I've read a lot of, research or other thought leadership on. So I'll be really curious to hear if this resonates for you and if you find it useful. Because as I always like to do, this new perspective that I'm going to be suggesting for how to view and approach commitments in your work life, in your family life, in your social life, that's the context here, pulls from an entirely different subject matter area. So what am I talking about? Consent. Today we're talking about consent, radical consent, as I like to call it. And we're applying that model of consent into work, family, social life. Those mundane day-to-day tasks, favors, asks, commitments that we all get hit with 1,000 times a day, it feels like. How do we preempt and think about those for ourselves? And how can we be better stewards of being on the other side of that equation when we're the ones who are making the ask or are in the position of power, wanting something from another person? How can we be really thoughtful and clean about that? So, consent. Now, this touches on themes of guilt, boundary setting, assertive communication, asking for help, right? All the things that most of us hate and dread and struggle with so much. And really, if I had to step back and say, what are all of these things about together? I'm oversimplifying, but one really clear thing they all have in common is power dynamics. All of these are situations where we're having to navigate either real or perceived disparities of power and try to do that in a way that is respectful and effective. Okay, and that is such a tricky skill set for just about all of us. It's not easy stuff. So let's pull the concept of consent into the conversation here and think about what are the elements of it and how does it inform, how can it inform and improve our just sort of normal emotional, social, professional transactions that we're in every single day. So here are the elements of good, solid, empowered consent. One, it is clear. Whoever is granting consent in that moment, it might be you if you're the one being asked to do something. It might be the other person if you're the one doing the asking. But the person in the position to give the consent must be giving it clearly. This is unambiguous, absolute yes, okay? The absence of a no does not count. Okay, so to apply this to yourself, if somebody's asked you like, hey, can you babysit my kids next Saturday or run these errands for me or take on this extra project at work, if your first instinct is like, oh, maybe I could probably make it work, I don't really want to, okay, that is not a clear, unambiguous, enthusiastic yes, right? It may not be a no, but we've sort of failed that first test. Now, with all of these things, caveat, I'm not telling you that if it doesn't meet all of these criteria that you can't or shouldn't do it, right? There's some, transactions, interactions in life that are not that high stakes. They're not really worth the fight. It's not worth delving into all of this like really nitty gritty emotional detail into. That's fine, right? We don't want society to grind to a halt here, but these things are really important to check in on, especially if you are learning for the first time, to really get realistic about your bandwidth, to avoid burnout, avoid exhaustion, set those boundaries, communicate clearly. This is new to you. You want to start practicing this checklist that we're going to go through pretty consistently, just so you kind of get it in your bones, okay? And again, if something violates some of these, it doesn't mean you can't do it, but it's something to be really conscious of, that you're choosing to go into a situation where you are not really that on board or enthusiastic about what's going on. Okay, so back to our checklist. Number one, is it clear, unambiguous? Yes. Not a no, but an absolute hell yes, enthusiastic. Item number two, element of consent. Is it ongoing? So at every stage of the process, are you still bought in? Now, maybe you say yes to take on a volunteer project at work, and sounds cool initially, and then you get, 3 weeks in and you realize, oh my gosh, I now have all these other obligations that I have to do. My life context has changed. More information has come out, and this is no longer doable. You may have made a commitment. You may need to stick with it for various reasons, but keep checking in with yourself and tracking that progress. If at any point during it, it is no longer an enthusiastic yes, that's information that you at least need to be consciously aware of and working with, and identifying what options you may have if you do need to get yourself out of that situation partway through after it's already begun. Item number three, element of consent. Is it coherent? And in this context, what we're talking about is, do you or the person you're asking something of actually have all the information? Are you realistically going in with your eyes wide open, knowing the full picture of what the ask is? Or is there information being withheld voluntarily, deliberately, or maybe just by accident? Maybe all the information isn't known yet. That's fine too, but be really, really thoughtful about, okay, if I'm committing to do this, take on this extra project, it's not just this amorphous, extra thing you'll somehow magically fit into the day. There is, even if it's a guess, you can probably estimate, okay, this is actually going to take me an additional 3 hours a week. And if I take that 3 hours a week, I'm going to have to take some other stuff away. And what are the knock-on effects of that? What other surprises might come up? What are the unknown unknowns and the known unknowns in this? You have to be really, really thoughtful and concretize what the full spectrum of that commitment might mean for yourself if you're the one being asked to do something. Now, if you're the asker of someone else, try to be a good steward of all the information you have. Be very clear and realistic and accurate with them about, this is actually what this is going to take. Don't sugarcoat it. Don't minimize it. Don't try to sell them with a bunch of, imaginary, carrots that you're dangling that may or may not come true. Be real, level with them so that they can make an informed decision. It's better that they know up front. If it's something that, once it gets down the road, they're not going to be able to hang with, it's better that they know now and give you a clear no now than finding that out 6 months in and then you're back to the drawing board. So clear, ongoing, coherent. The last item on here is voluntary. So what voluntary is not? Voluntary is not, someone asked me 37 times to do this thing, and I'm just so freaking sick of listening to them beat this dead horse that fine, I guess, sure, I'll go along with it just to get them off my back. That is not voluntary, okay? A metaphor I like to think about, and this goes back to my early career days in online marketing, but the idea of opting in versus opting out. Some of us are more familiar with this now with all the recent data privacy legislation, but the idea of opting out is that it is, think about signing up for some online newsletter, and the box is pre-checked for you saying, yes, I want to receive all your promotional nonsense, right? That's an opt-out model. They're assuming that you're in, unless you take extra time, energy, effort, attention, focus to explicitly say, no, I'm out. Okay. That is a not really purely voluntary model. Sure, technically people have the ability to opt out, but we know what people's attention spans are, and you're making an extra ask of them to get themselves out of this thing that you're just assuming they will do for you otherwise. That is not a really clean model that we want to replicate. The alternative that I like better is the opt-in model, right? We give someone an option to say, the box is unchecked by default in this. We give them the option to say, yes, this is something that is meaningful to me. I do want it. They have to actually make an effort to say, yes, I am in. And we're not assuming anything. We're not putting anything on them by default. Okay, that is a clean, real, voluntary opt-in kind of model. And that's the thing we want to aim for, not making any assumptions. As a side note, this element in particular has a lot of overlap with the principles and the ideals outlined in the classic book Nonviolent Communication, which has nothing to do really with actual violence, so don't be turned off by that, but it's an amazing, super powerful, super useful read if you're kind of, curious about that line of thinking. So clear, ongoing, coherent, voluntary. Okay, these are the elements of consent anywhere in our lives. Now, why does any of this matter? Because for your own sake personally, so you stop overcommitting and stop feeling guilty and awkward and having all these like boundary slippages, and for the sake of other people who you might be asking something of, everyone deserves less guilt, less exhaustion, less of these, subtle, maybe even accidental, unintentional, but slightly manipulative things that come into play just by virtue of the nature of power disparities, real or perceived. And ultimately, we want to be all operating from a model that is empowered, confident, aligned, and not resentful, right? Resentment is the natural net output for someone who is asked in a not clean, not fully consensual way to do stuff, and they don't have the boundaries or the strength to say no. Resentment is the output. Nothing good has ever happened in the land of resentment. So do yourself a favor, check in on these elements of consent. If you choose to go ahead anyway, that's fine, but at least know that you now have this sort of barometer in your back pocket to help you decide, should I actually say yes? Am I a yes to this? Or am I just kind of going along because there are other dynamics at play? There's another calculation I'm doing that is kind of forcing my hand here. You may still do it anyway, but at least you'll know and be right with yourself about why you are choosing to make that decision. And same goes for anyone else when you are the one in that position of power. So I hope this is useful. I hope this is at least thought-provoking. I would genuinely love to hear how this lands, if you find it useful as well. And some applications that you might find for this in your life. I hope it brings you much more peace of mind, less overcommitment, less resentment, less exhaustion, and more aligned decision making. Take care.